when you have your own North Star and you're patient towards that idea, the idea that people can tell him he's crazy and it doesn't matter. I have an idea, and you're like, if I'm right, I'm right, and if I'm not, I'm not. I get it, but I'm doing this. And you come up with this thing that has no buttons, and when it first came out with no buttons, you're like, there's no buttons, it's not going to work. I remember I used to have one with a ton of buttons, and I stayed with it. And it's funny. You're like, totally right. That persistent. I'm following my own North Star, and the last sort of major bucket there is the data-driven perfection form of leadership, where they're leading with exceptional. Like, this is exceptional. I really feel that talent optimization is let's use this data. We've got to create not only pools of data with your own company, but we need aggregated data. If you're a 250 person company, you don't have enough data to be able to find correlation, and ultimately you want causation for this data. We need much larger data sets. And I think the people who end up winning this game are going to be building really high quality data models on top of large LLMs.
All right, guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of the All Innovation, the AI podcast with myself, Keenan Hart, and my trusty co-host, Dante McClain. We're incredibly excited because we have Mike Zani with us here today, who is the CEO of Predictive Index. He is a Wall Street Journal best-selling author, holds an MBA from Harvard University, U.S. Olympic Sailing Coach of the Year, and is dominating in the space of giving us data to create a better future of teamwork, but also the landscape of business as well. Mike, welcome to the show, man.
Keenan, it's great to be here. And thank you, Dante.
We're really excited to be able to dive into today's episode. One of the things that we'd like to do on the podcast is tie this episode together with our previous guest. And the previous guest on the show was the CEO named Raj of Stitch PEO. Now, his question is a really interesting one. I'd love to get your input as we get the episode started here. How does AI impact the workforce in a negative way? How does it also impact the future of work? And what can we do as business leaders to create a better balance of machine learning and human power for the future of business?
Wow, that is a great question. Obviously, anyone who's seen Terminator is really afraid of Skynet. I'm not going to go dark there. But I am going to go to the downside of AI. I think humans have become incredibly reliant on red light, green light responses. That people actually don't understand how their Tesla drives for them. They just want it to work. And I think that sort of permeates everything. They just want an answer. They want right suggestion. So the scary part about AI with respect to the future of work is people outsourcing too much to it and thinking that you let the algorithms just say, hey, Keenan's going to be a great fit for this role and Dante won't be. And they're not going to peel back the onion a little more to find out, what's in your heart, like what motivates you, what are your passions? Because I think it won't get to that right away. And that red light, green light response scares me. Not from a Terminator scare, but just you're gonna build crappy teams and you're gonna make mistakes, and it's gonna fall to human error because they want ease. They just want it now. Now the future work positively, the amazing piece, and I'm setting this up with my question actually that I've thought about is we know AI, the productivity tools, are gonna massively change the workspace. Now, some people think it's going to just eliminate jobs. That didn't happen when we invented the computer. That didn't happen with fax machines. That didn't happen with the World Wide Web. I don't think it's going to happen now, but it is going to displace jobs. And we need to make sure that people get retrained in what they need to do. And my biggest fear with that is ageism. Are they going to retrain the 65-year-old? Probably not. They'll rather retrain the 22-year-old who won't need as much training. But I do think it's going to really unlock a tremendous amount of productivity gains, and we're seeing it already. If you've done any prep for shows, which I know you have, the ability to write, the ability to create agendas, the ability to create flows. It's fantastic how efficient it can make just two people with a podcast and everything else.
I think it's a really interesting time because we really do have to almost be skeptical, is the word that I'm kind of thinking about in my mind right now, with the honed sense of curiosity. Because one of the things that is in human behavior is we take the least path of resistance, right? And one of the things that I worry about in the world of AI is people will take the output as the gospel rather than being curious enough to challenge the results that come out of it. Like you said, if you see an algorithm or a large language model that's saying anybody over the age of 65 doesn't have the expertise to work in this space, it seems like we're missing out on a lot of lived experience and perspective that often the AI can't touch. And so I think we need to find that balance, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and there's a gut to things. I do remember when I used to be a professional sailor, I had this incredible, I'll call him a co-sailor, but it was just when computers were coming into operating boats, and the guy looked at me and says, "Hey kid, put the computer down." He says, "You're a lot better seat of the pants." And I was like, and he goes, "No, just put it down and just look up." And it was like this shock of like, you can still be that seat of the pants, whatever it is, athlete. Now, I think there is a blend today. You certainly need your quantitative analytics. You need the video rooms in all sports. But at some point when you're feeling it, the coach is writing up a play saying, "Dante's got a hot hand, put the ball in his hand." They're not looking at the analytics. They're feeling it. And I think in art, in life, in business, in sport, you can't lose sight of that element of it that you can't calculate.
I'd love to double click on that idea of needing to retool and retrain employees. So there was a study that came out by McKinsey. The study came out last year, 2023, and they said they're estimating by 2030, 800 million jobs, up to 800 million jobs are going to be lost through automation and AI. But they're also estimating that 880 million, so an additional 80 million jobs are going to be created through efficiencies, increased income, and increased demand. I'm curious your take on what that retraining and retooling process looks like, because we kind of have this dichotomy going on right now where companies believe that the best, most efficient way sometimes is just, hey, you're no longer fit for the job, let's lay you off, let's fire you. But in this new age that we're entering into, it seems like it might be a better spend of resources to say, hey, you're still a great person. How can we retrain and retool you for this future of work?
So I go back to, this can be another sports analogy, but teams and companies that need to win right away. So the teams will be, someone gets a new manager or ownership, and they pour money in, and they go to the free agency markets, and they buy the best that's available to them, and they often overpay. And businesses, typically private equity, or even more so than venture, it's like, they're going to do a 5-year hold, and they're going to want to really, flip this thing in 5 years. So they want you to do it now, put the investment in now, get the best and brightest now, so you have to pay for it. Whereas I think companies and sports teams that have a much longer longitudinal attitude, they're not trying to create a great company to flip in 3, 4, 5 years. They're trying to create something fantastic and be there all the time. And I think that the sports teams that do this have really great scouting. They have really great farm systems, and they invest in their coaching, and they're covetous. They won't let people come into their farm system and steal all their talent. They really defend that. They said, no, we're cultivating our next gen here, and we're really treating it thoughtfully. I think great companies do that. They invest in not just off the shelf learning and development, but they really train their people. They have mentorship programs. They spot talent, and they promote talent early. They have internal marketplaces for talent. So there's a question of like, you're going to displace all those jobs. Why are you going to let your true talent leave your company? And you're not. You have to be ahead of this curve and say, you just crushed it on XYZ project. I'm already thinking about your career. I'm thinking about your next role in the company. I've got a plan for you mapped out. I'm sharing that with you early. And I actually think we're going to start seeing employment contracts come back. Because if you're truly going to invest in people, and this is going to first happen, and it's going to surprise you. It's going to happen in the trades first, because we can't fill our trades right now. I have a good friend who rebuilds fire trucks. He can't hire enough diesel mechanics or welders, and he's just paying and paying. He's got to go early, train people how to weld, invest in training people how to be diesel mechanics, and then what you need to do is like, you're going to work for me for 3 years. And if you leave before 3 years, you got to pay me back. If you leave after 2, you got to pay me back 1/3 of the training.
Yeah.
And with contracts, now this happens in sports, and there are times when you bought talent early and you benefit if it's better. Maybe someone breaks a leg. You have to still pay them even though they can't do the job. And I think these employment contracts are going to come back sooner in the trades, in the quid pro quo of I'll train you. Now, after the contract's up, you have to inspire people to say, what is the value proposition of you doing another tour of duty here? What does it look like? Because in the trades, there's low barriers to entry, so people, they just buy a truck, they tool it up, and they compete with you and try and steal all your joint customers. However, not everyone in the trades wants to be an entrepreneur, so some of them will say, hey, if the pricing is right, I'll still work for you, keep your truck, keep your tools, keep your name on the side, and have some of the headaches, and that sharing. I think we're going to see that, and great longitudinal companies are going to invest in the very customized, personalized L&D to get the job done. And it doesn't have to be, Harvard Business School education. It doesn't have to be, I think IBM had Croton Labs, where they had their own institutes where they would train their best and the brightest. It's going to be way more grassroots than that. And using it, like I use the diesel mechanic, you're going to send them to, a paid institute to go get their certification for that.
Yeah, what I'm hearing us talk about here is, sustainability and longevity. I feel like we've gotten into a place in society where we're looking to churn and burn. We're looking for instant gratification, and the pendulum swinging in the other direction is that longevity and sustainability. Because I know a lot of people today often point the finger in judgment at previous generations and say, you worked at the same place for 20 years. Why would somebody do that today? But when we talk about sustainable culture, experiences, and also getting that long-term buy-in from employees, I feel like the vision has to be, like you said, on a longer time horizon in order for us to accomplish those certain things. I'd like to use that as kind of a little segue to talk about, Predictive Index and the fact that you back in 2009 tried to acquire this business, had to wait 6 years till 2014 to acquire it, because this is a 60-year-old business. Let's kind of talk about what you guys are doing now and the transformation that you've been able to leverage inside the company.
We're about to be 70 years old. Yeah, we bought it at 60 years old. Yeah, I can sort of consider myself a refounder as opposed to a founder of the business. I never had an opportunity to actually meet our founder, who started the company in 1955. It's kind of boggles my mind. I think this long-term longitudinal view on businesses, I actually was not looking. In 2009, we took a shot at buying PI, and they said no. And I moved on, invested in another company, and I bought and sold my second company. And when I was thinking of doing a third, I was thinking of doing something very local, 100% on my own. So I didn't have a board, and I wouldn't have outside investors, and maybe less headaches. It was going to be a get off the totally insane venture private equity worldview. But I did say to myself, if the right opportunity comes along, I'll do it again. I'll take external capital again. And PI was that type of opportunity. So when it came up, I called my business partner, Daniel. I was like, let's put the band back together again. And let's do this. It's probably going to be a longer than a 5-year it's a big opportunity. It's turned out it's 10. And I think there's, if you run into those things that are sort of passion projects, that you break your a priori thesis. I think this is true for Keenan, what you said about if you can inspire a younger person today, late millennial, early Gen Z, with your brand, with your culture, with your BHAG, with the purpose behind your mission, that people will sign up for multiple tours of duty with you. They won't just do a year and a half. They'll sign up for another one. They're talking to you about the third one halfway through the second one. They're actually one of those people who are staying for, 3, 5, 7, 10 years. And, we have had the opportunity to have people stay with us a long time since we bought the company 10 years ago. And we've even had people leave and then boomerang back and said, I thought the grass was greener. It's not. So I do think those companies that can get that right blend of culture and purpose and their hiring brand as well as their employment brand, investing in your career where you can get that longevity. And I totally agree with you. You look at someone's resume and you're like, wow, you've been somewhere 12 years. What's wrong? Whereas 30 years ago, if you did the other, you're like, you're a job hopper. Like, everyone expects you to be a job hopper now because it's a faster way to money. Money, title, power. So people unfortunately make decisions for all those reasons: money, title, power, as opposed to passion and purpose. But I think you can start winning the day with those. I would call them more important, but they're secondary tools for most people's decision making.
I'd love to put a pin in the job hopping part, but I'd like to catch the audience up on what you do exactly at Predictive Index. And I think to do that, I'd love for you to share the story of your first company, Ledco, and how needing to retool some of the employees that you had at Ledco almost kind of sparked some of the interest in Predictive Index.
Going way back machine. So in 2004, my business partner, Daniel, who I put the band back together with, he and I bought a company called Ledco, Law Enforcement Development Company in Detroit. And we both weren't from Detroit. So, we're moving to Detroit. And I still remember November 23rd, 2004, we're standing in the manufacturing floor of this company, sweaty palms. We're 32 and 34, and we're snot-nosed managers. We had no real rights to put ourselves in charge of this company, to be, the CEO, co-CEO of the organization. And we've got a PowerPoint, but the acoustic's really bad in this manufacturing, and the lighting is terrible. And everyone's just looking at us like, who are these guys? And all they're thinking about is, am I going to lose my job? And who are these people, and what does this mean for me? Everyone thinks about their me issues. And we're sitting here, freshly minted Harvard MBAs. We knew enough about strategy to kind of get that 5-year plan right. It was mostly right. We knew enough about finance to know how much to pay for the company and how much debt to equity to put in it. We had a good enough network to be able to buy it, because both of us had negative net worths. We had never purchased a house nor a new car, either one of us, and we paid $6.5 million for this business. But we totally screwed up the talent side of things. Totally. Like, miserable performance. So you got most of the stuff right. Only 4 people of those 45 made it. And they were the people that the old owners needed to run the old strategy. They weren't the people that we needed to run a new strategy. It was almost like switching sports. It was like you take a swim team and you go, okay, we're going to play basketball. And they go, well, fortunately, a lot of us are tall. And you're like, but that's it. Like, that was the only, no one made it. You're like, turns out you swam because you didn't have hand-eye coordination. So, and I say this tongue in cheek because time's gone by. Like, unfortunately, 41 people didn't make it. And that was our fault. Like, we should have identified that in due diligence, that these weren't the people, but we didn't know. It took us about a year and a half, and Daniel and I wanted to sort of compete and win with and through teams. And when we first got there, it's like, we made the agendas, we came up with the ideas, we ran the meetings, we did the postmortems for the meetings, we held people's hands through executing. And what we wanted was everyone to be better than we were. And so in order to go from absolutely here to absolutely there, it took pretty much the full 5 years. And we tried all sorts of different tools. Some of them worked miserably. Some of them worked well. I used to do those case study interview questions like estimate how much oxygen is in the Earth's atmosphere. And all that proves is that you're a jerk. Like, literally, you ask that question and the person is like trying to answer this question, like, what a pompous beep, beep, beep. Yeah. And I stopped doing that. But we did run into the Predictive Index as one of the tools that we tried. And Daniel and I both got really deep into the science. Like, we got trained in the stuff. We started using it. We were the 2 power users in the organization. We used to give people readbacks on their behavioral outcomes and talk about differences between people. And we really felt it gave us the sort of decoder ring for people. Like, how do we modify ourselves to manage, people you don't know? So we haven't met, but I know, because you've told me your reference profiles, you're both high dominance individuals. You both have a need to put your thumbprint on things. You will even endure conflict in order to put your ideas into practice. And you will fight for things that you believe in and the goals, and you're both impatient. You apply pressure to yourself. You think that's a great way to work. And it's like, how do I know these things about you? I read your decoder ring. So I can start managing you. And I don't mean just managing down. I mean managing across or even up. Give your boss what they need. And these tools are so powerful to really working with people, to creating great teams, to managing through unintended conflict. Because really what you want is, you put people in a job they can be successful in. You enable them to communicate with their boss and the team around them and feel like they can participate and be successful in the corporate goals. You do that, and you're just unlocking a ton of stuff. So it's like when we sold Ledco in 2009, that's when, Dante, we actually took a crack at pitching PI and said, please sell this thing to us. We love this tool. It's a diamond in the rough. We got close, but the family just wasn't ready to let go of it at the time.
I'd love to talk a little bit about introducing PI to organizations today. Do we ever have to break any type of beliefs or mindset obstacles that keep us as leaders from really taking the time to individually understand our team members? Because as you were talking there, I was incredibly refreshed, because it sounded like the young voice in my head said, I knew that middle school test grades weren't going to define me as an individual, rather than taking a test like this, which I feel like gives you so much more insight into the individual, what motivates them, and how we can kind of leverage them as an employee from a leadership perspective. So are you trying to break any type of mindset barriers or belief systems and getting leaders today to kind of buy into utilizing a tool like this that's backed in so much behavioral science?
I do, but it has nothing to do with modern technology. It has everything to do. My biggest competitor is not a company. My biggest competitor is the old way of doing things. So I literally walk around with a 2x4 whacking people with it, just trying to shock them out of doing it the old way. And the old way, and it's working, and actually things like algorithms and suggestion help. Because when a store says, wow, you bought these things, I think you're going to like these shoes, and you're like, wow, I love those shoes, I'm going to buy them. You're more open to the suggestion. And this is what we're saying is, use cognitive and behavioral science. Use scientific tools to make sure there's a fit for a number of things. Like I said, it's a fit for the job, fit with your manager team, fit with the work that you need to do. And I actually see these sort of like a third of people are like, oh my God, I can do that. I need this. A third of people are the absolute opposite. Like, I don't believe in that witchcraft. I like, I'm a unicorn. I can assess talent myself. And, some people are like, that's a useful tool, but I don't have people problems, which I usually like, they're a future client because everyone's got people problems. So you see, I don't like religion change. It's like if you think it's witchcraft, I just move on. But I do take a hard whack at you with my 2x4, trying to get you to do things differently. Because putting flowery job descriptions, doing unstructured interviewing, falling for someone who has a firm handshake and doesn't have a neck tattoo, because you're applying these biases. What they wore, did they show up on time, and did they send you a thank you email or in response, and how they wrote their resume. Some of that's important, but you've got to break it down way further than that. And the simplest framework that has worked for me is head, heart, briefcase. And everyone, it should be head, heart, knapsack for today, but everyone overweights the knapsack. That's your resume. That is all the things you've done, your curriculum vitae. You did customer service at 3 companies. 2 of those companies look just like mine. You've had a nice trajectory of success in customer service. Your title has moved up. You'll probably be great at customer service with us. And you're like, and they hire the person. Whereas if you start the other way, head, are they a behavioral fit for the job? Are they a cognitive fit for the job? Yes or no? Then heart, what drives them? Why do they even want to work for your company? Why do they want to do this job? Find out those things. You can actually train the skills unless it's incredibly unique. If you're the head of research and development at a biotech company, you need all 3, head, heart, and briefcase. But for most positions, you just need head and heart, and get back to the view of let's train people. It's a lot easier to train someone on a resume item than change their behavioral drives or their cognitive capability. You just can't do it.
I'd love to dive into the growth of Predictive Index. Can you share a little bit about where you started and then where you guys are now? And what have been some of the challenges? You spoke to some of the initial challenges, hitting people over the head, trying to initiate change, but what are some of the other challenges that you face in the growth of the company?
Well, it was a family-run business that was very profitable. So that's a curse and a blessing. It's a blessing for the company. They had sort of an ATM machine that just gave them cash. But then again, it was sort of running on autopilot for almost 20 years. So this was a system based in pencil and paper, and they built what I'll call a surveying tool. It's not quite software, but it was web-based software, but it was just a surveying tool. And there was there's 34 people and 0 technologists. Like, they only had an outsourced vendor who, if they needed the website changed, they called the vendor. So it was a science company, but it wasn't a technology company in the traditional sense of software. So it was doing 16 million of revenue, but throwing off 7.5 million of cash, like 46% EBITDA margins. I mean, it's crazy how profitable this company was. So Daniel and I decided, we've got to take all that EBITDA and turn it into a growth engine. We need to reinvent this company. We have to revalidate the science, rebuild the software. We need to rethink our go-to-market strategy and sort of do our best to take really good science and apply it in the needs, the way people are using stuff like this today. And for us today, it's actually meeting people where they're already working, is a big internal mandate. But over 10 years, we've grown it from 16 million in revenue to 100 million in revenue. We should be, 105 110 at the end of the year, and we're about break even. So we've grown the company significantly from a top line, and some would say destroyed the company's profitability. But I think you take a bigger lens on this. We know the company can be profitable. We're spending. I should say investing. We're investing all of our free cash flow to continue the good work, because the total addressable market for a company like ours is, we have 10,000 clients. I mean, the total addressable market is, we should have 50,000 clients, maybe 100,000 clients. Any organization with people, really. So it's a very large total addressable market. And I would say it's typically 50-person companies and above, because small companies with 20 people, they usually do it the old-fashioned way. They just get everyone in a room and sort of hash it out, even though they should be doing it a different way.
I would love to know some of the cultural differences. So we have a family-owned business that's doing about 16 million and spinning off about 7 million in cash. Now we're at 100 million in revenue. What are some of the cultural differences that we've seen in kind of the company growing? I'm really interested in that. Just because I know that what got you guys there is not going to get you guys to where you guys are trying to get to. So what were some of the differences in change and team and culture and that type of stuff?
It was similar to Ledco, but in where a lot of people churned out of the organization, and some because it was a older employee base, and some people decided to retire. Actually, a lot of people who worked for us decided to be. We sell service through a certified channel network. A lot of our employees decided to become channel partners, so they spun out into our network, because that can be more of a lifestyle business. And I think sort of lower ambition family-run companies tend to not run very fast. And when Daniel and I came in and we're like, we are literally running as fast as we can with scissors in our hands. Like it's a dangerous environment, running with scissors. And just like your mother said, you should never do that. It was the sort of thing that freaks some people out. So we were expecting churn. So some of the cultural change was retooling the team with new hires, and sort of retooling the team with big vision on what we needed to do. But I think the best way to answer your question is the thing that was most stable. Our existing certified partner network, that some of these individuals were trained in the 90s, 1990, on the tools, and they had been selling, servicing, and consulting on the Predictive Index for longer than we've been involved. We first met the tool in 2006, so they'd been in this company 15 years longer than we had, and we were there telling them what to do. They didn't like that a lot, and anyone who's dealt with the distribution channel realizes, especially when it's an independent distribution channel, you don't win the day with telling people what to do. You have to inspire them to want to do stuff. You have to work with them to come to the answers. But it was good old-fashioned change management. They didn't want to change as fast as we did. And when the ones who did see change didn't always necessarily agree what that change should be. So there was a lot of hard change management early on how to win over the network to some new ideas. And I've talked to I think it's our second largest partner. He says, I've made more money in the last 10 years than I did in the previous 25. Wow. And I bring this up to him monthly, because he still fights me on every change we do. I said, but you're making more money. And he goes, I know, I just don't like it. So it's change management that I think I probably spend a third of the hours with my channel is just working on change management. But fortunately, one of our investors is heavily involved in the auto industry, and they invited me to be a speaker at the Southeastern Toyota Dealer Conference. 300 dealers in a room, and I realized If you're dealing with an independent channel, it's the same thing. Like the car dealers were saying the exact same things that our certified partners do, and the challenges are the same of how to work with them to jointly deliver a product to the consumer. And it's actually really interesting business. It's hard, it's messy. The change management is more suggestion and than coercion, and inspiration certainly more than coercion. And that's been the hardest thing, was really getting them on board with the new big idea and where we were taking this business. And part of that was also technology. Most of them came in because they were behavioral scientists, or that's where their passion was. They weren't technologists. And we took a science-based, almost psychological product, and now you would look at us and say, that is software that tells you things about people. It's a mind shift. And some of their kids who are in the business are some of our best change agents. We speak with the children and they're like, hey, mom, dad, this is actually a good idea. We should be doing this. And sometimes they're more successful than we are at convincing our largest channel partners on how to do things.
It sounds like the certified partner route has been your core go-to-market strategy. Is that correct?
It has been the dominant go-to-market strategy.
Mm-hmm.
We actually have our founding partners. There were basically 50 partners when we bought the company, and they have the deepest knowledge. They have a very large customer base. Then we recruited about 500 new partners in the last 10 years. And they are collectively, the 500 new are about as big as the 50 founding. And we sell direct. But when we sell direct, we just transfer those accounts to our network, because we've realized we can sell better than our network, but we can't service better than our network. We service about as well as our network, centralized in Boston. And if we can only do it as well as them, we would much rather have them do it, because I want to feed the network. I want the network to be super healthy. I want our customers to have, local representation, so that if you have a problem with something, you call your certified partner. If you don't like your certified partner, but you like the software, you can find a new one. It's kind of like how Salesforce and HubSpot run with their implementation partners.
I'd love to know a little bit about this distributive network of partners, right? I think a lot of businesses find themselves, from a leadership perspective, having to be flexible and nimble enough to meet this new way of work, kind of where they are. And the distributive network kind of sounds similar to remote work, distributive team. I'd like for you to kind of talk about some of the leadership styles or skill sets that we had to develop as an organization to be able to meet and manage this distributive network. Because I feel like there's a lot of similarities in CEOs and founders who are managing a remote team that's across the country or across the world today. And I'd love to hear your 2 cents on kind of this future distributive network, if you will.
I sometimes think it's probably more akin to politics, where you actually have a stump speech and you go from town to town, or fundraiser to fundraiser, or event to event. You say the same speech, except the people are new. And you might be like, do you get tired of saying that speech? And you're like, one of my coaches is like, leaders are repeaters. They're just like, keep saying it. And you're like, but I said that last month. They're like, it doesn't matter. Most of them either weren't listening, or they've got to hear it again, or they've got to hear it in a slightly different way. So I really feel that there is a lot of evangelizing these ideas with a powerful belief. You're coming at it in different ways on why we're doing what we're doing. People will ask tough follow-up questions, and those are probably those gem opportunities where you're like, okay, we are going to sit down one-on-one and really talk about why that is important. Now, since the N is 550, you can do some of those one-on-ones, whereas a politician probably only does that with their big ticket donors. But I think that the tools that you use, you measure a lot of sentiment. Sometimes your speeches land flat. Sometimes they sing. Um, you try different ways to get through. Maybe you need to change your messaging. You need to solicit feedback from them. So we show them prototypes early. Part of it is to get their feedback. Part of it is to get pre-buy-in from some of the most influential. But it is good old-fashioned work. Like, it does not stop. And I actually have an editorial calendar for my network. What am I talking about? What are we talking about next month? Where are we slowly taking them on this journey? You go back and look at old materials that says, wow, we really didn't sell that idea hard enough. We got to try that again. So it is work, and it works better with the people who are focused 100% of their efforts with PI. We're the first thing in their briefcase. When we're the third thing in someone's briefcase, we're not getting 100% of their bandwidth, and it doesn't always stick. And consequently, if you're the third thing in someone's briefcase, they're not your best partners, and you don't capture their hearts and minds. So sometimes you're trying to say, how do I go from 3 to 2? How do I go from 2 to 1? And that's how they need a healthy network. They need to make money, or they wouldn't do that.
I'd love to kind of segue into the idea of personal branding. So you talked a little bit about how having this distributed network is kind of like, being a politician. You have your speech and so on and so forth. But this idea that we're kind of moving into an age where people want to know who they're working for. They want to know the man behind the machine. You're on this podcast with us today, and I'm sure a lot of the people within your organization are going to watch it and kind of see your story and your backstory. Why do you feel it's important for leaders today to be more forward-facing rather than, 10, 15, 20 years ago where, you didn't see the leader as much on camera, front and center as you do today?
Yeah, I just wrote a podcast called The Woman in the Arena, which was a playoff of Teddy Roosevelt's speech, The Man in the Arena. So you said the man behind the machine. I'm gonna say it's the woman in the arena. So they want to know the woman in the arena, and I think today the influencer marketing is astounding. I'm continually blown away. I mean, you two can go create a new rum or vodka or bourbon or tequila and market it, and it's going to be huge if you have a big enough audience to do that. And it's like, do I think Keenan and Dante would make good tequila? You're like, I don't know. I think they could manage a project, so they could find a tequila. They can choose it to be expensive or cheap. They can choose the bottling and the packaging, and they can use their stump to sell it. It's phenomenal, the reach that this distributed model gets. So I really think that it used to be the bastion of the Jamie Dimons. They used to get invited to events, and they would be trotted out for the main keynotes, and the lesser leaders would be in the breakout sessions, and the lesser leaders would just be attendees. And that was sort of the hierarchy. Now the hierarchy's totally changed. So if you have a soapbox of sorts, whether it's the hard work to build it yourself, as you all know, or whether you have a topic that you speak on, like if you're speaking on AI and you make sense, you're going to be invited to a lot of talks right now, and just it's no different than there's going to be a lot of security talks after this most recent Microsoft breach. But I think it's the barriers are lower. When the barriers are low, there's a lot of disruption, and people are trying things. And I love this learning method. I've never learned so much in my life, including master's degrees and undergraduate degrees, is through YouTube, through podcasts. It's fantastic. You can do anything you want to do. You can be anyone you want to be by now. Check your sources. Make sure you're following good people. But I use as an example, my son and I electrified a 1977 Volkswagen bus by ourselves. We took out a perfectly good engine and put in an electric motor and 10 Tesla modules, and it runs, and it's his daily driver. I've never worked on cars before in my life, and he was 16. So there you go. Like, you can learn so much because the walls have come down, and it's not this erudite, I've got to go to an institution. And this whole movement that you're part of is a huge part of that. And it's beautiful and scary, and it's hard to get sources, and it can be frustrating. But I don't think major media outlets are doing a very good job. So we go somewhere else.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept. I would love to know, because you are a highly successful entrepreneur CEO, you came onto the podcast with some insights to share. What would a piece of advice that you would give to other CEOs or founders who are looking to start this media campaign, but maybe they just don't feel confident enough to do it? What would one piece of advice for you be to them?
I think the confidence, if they don't do it, is they're going to either they're going to partner with someone or hire production help. That once you learn this game, I mean, I've written a book. Podcasts are a lot more interesting than writing a book. Like a book is a slog. Like, I think if I put as much energy into the book as I did, you could hire a producer, and I mean, producers can be very expensive, but you can also get started at a pretty reasonable level and create a lot of momentum early. And I would say I would do a hard check on, do you like to be a storyteller? There's a whole lot of storytelling, story arcs that go into this, asking good questions. I love the dynamic that you two have. You really build off each other in a nice way. You need something of that ilk. But gut check you're a good storyteller, find a partner or hire a producer to get started. Because if you're a little scared, it's probably just the initial activation energy to get started. You get 5 of these, 10 of these, 20 of these under your belt, they're going to be like, they'll know whether they can do it or not. And the answer might be no, and that's probably fine. That's a fine lesson to learn. But they might love it.
One of my favorite sayings right now is, you don't have imposter syndrome. You just haven't done enough work to make sure or find out if you're good enough yet, and I feel like that's kind of the iteration of hopping on here and having these conversations. You have to do enough work in order to be able to figure out what your voice is in order to how to tell a story. And I feel like, it's huge benefit of being able to create long form media like this is being able to share the space with you, Mike, and listening to your insights, all the things that you have to bring to the conversation, because that gives us the ability to take the golden nuggets that come out of your perspectives and compare and contrast them to other leaders as well. I'd like to kind of ask you the question about, throughout this entire journey of buying, building, selling businesses, how have you been able to keep your mental health and your well-being on kind of the forefront? Have you always done a good job in your career in taking care of yourself first, or is that something that you've learned in time?
Yeah, I think it's when I was a sailing athlete, and then when I was a sailing coach and getting the pleasure of being around super high end, Olympic athletes, just the maintenance of your body was so important. Getting good sleep, regular exercise, eating somewhat as healthy as you can. I mean, everyone has cheat days, but making sure you're keeping track of that stuff so that you can really keep it tight. And the best lesson was when my wife and I had children, and really when she had 2 kids. We both got out of shape. Maybe mine was sympathy out of shape because I really had no excuse. But then sort of getting in shape after that and realizing that step function, I think it was the only 3-year period where I was sort of super doughy. And popping out of that and realize I have so much more energy. I'm a nicer person. I have more creativity. I can do a 3rd session in a day. You do pre-lunch, post-lunch, and then you have the energy to do a post-dinner work, and it really unlocks so much. So I do think there's there's that, and some people take that really extreme with biohacking and a lot of supplements that I don't particularly do, but that's from the health and wellness perspective. And if you're not well, God, it attacks you all the time, and it is merciless. So you just don't feel like moving. You don't feel like doing the extra X that you need to do. So that is crucially important. I also was really informed by this book, Shopcraft as Soulcraft, that was talking about, really working with your hands in some capacity, creating a shop-esque space where you can do something creative and tangible. And since that time, I've really, like I told you about the bus project, but I've really invested in making stuff and creating. And when you are a CEO, kind of intangible job, software, kind of intangible job, psychology, kind of intangible. It's nice to like make something once in a while and say, wow, that's pretty, or that's terrible looking, but I built it. So I think most people that might be a hobby. It doesn't have to be shop craft. But I think that balance is nice because it gets you out of check, even if it's 5 hours a week, to think differently and, push yourself. And this is when I was referring to YouTube about learning amazing things that, from influencers and people who are doing the DIY support. It is such a treasure trove of information. It's mind blowing. I remain maximum impressed with what you can learn online today.
I'd love to touch a little bit on your book, The Science of Dream Teams. We talked a little bit about the analogy of sports teams and how sports teams seem to be way ahead of the game of business and how they approach talent acquisition and talent management and talent optimization. Can you talk a little bit about your view on that?
I think we are 30 years behind sport and business. And, when you think about the analytics that have come into sport and how far ahead they are. I mean, I even say that my children, when they were playing FIFA 10 years ago, they had a better HR dashboard on Xbox than we have in business, managing their players. They have these little player scorecards, and they manage the offense and defense, and they're the manager. And I was looking at this going, wait, you're the manager? They're like, yeah, well, I also play, but I'm also the manager. And I'm like, and then I would play them, so I would pick the 3 best players, and they would laugh. And you're like, you picked 3 guys who have play no defense. They just score goals. You're like, I'm going to tear you up. And I was like, my kid is killing me with HR. And I'm like, in the HR industry, I really feel that talent optimization is let's use this data. We've got to create not only pools of data with your own company, but we need aggregated data. If you're a 250 person company, you don't have enough data to be able to find correlation, and ultimately you want causation for this data. We need much larger data sets. And I think the people who end up winning this game are going to be building really high quality data models on top of large LLMs. And then you've got to build these APIs so that people can call on that data when they need it. So let's just say, Keenan, you're hiring a new CFO. You're hiring a CFO. You're like, what kind of CFO do I need? And then there's other questions like, well, what type of CFO? What's the nature of your company? What's the nature of the work? You want to just do a data call and say, here's what you want. You want a venturer. Turns out Dante's a venturer, and you're like, you get to say, okay, you would qualify behaviorally at least, but these data calls and models, we need much larger data sets so that people can really optimize their talent. And sports has it, to the point of it's obnoxious. They talk about spin rate on a pitcher, and they're like, oh, we got to pull the pitcher. Why? Well, its spin rate's gone from 2,500 to 2,000. If you went back 10 years and said that to a manager, they'd be like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
They wouldn't even, they'd be like, what is spin rate? And that was an accident. They put cameras in all of the stadiums, the high def cameras, and they started measuring spin rate. And all of a sudden you're like, who knew that was going to be an important piece of data? And now they're pulling pictures based on it. So we've got to start collecting this data and building the models and the data sets. And it's got to be open enough that you can actually build off of it and get to causation.
In our previous conversation, you had talked about the prediction that so many people have out there, which is there's going to be massive LLMs that are going to do everything. And I was recently listening to a podcast with Mark Zuckerberg, and he was talking about that same idea of the future. He was like, people think there's going to be 1, 2, 3, or 4 large LLMs that are going to do everything. But what his prediction is there's going to be hundreds of different models that are going to be specialized on data that people can plug into to get the best contextual answer back for whatever their use case is. I really thought that was really interesting, and it kind of made me think about our previous conversation, Mike, because I do believe that there's going to be so many different LLM data sets that have the ability to be touched with an API, call, push information back. That's really going to give us the future rather than these behemoths in the space. What's kind of your 2 cents on that?
It'd be cool if I could have said that Zuck and I talked about that. That's not true. That's fake news. I do think that the size of the LLMs, I think obviously the majors are in a much better position to answer the question of what that architecture looks like. The reason I think it is going to be smaller models working on top of existing LLMs is because people are going to be too protective of their data. That they are not going to want to give it away and let that cow, leave the barn. They're going to be super protective of it. They're going to want to have private calls, and they're going to pay you. You're going to pay them on a subscription basis still, not a one-time fee. Now, if someone may do acquisitions, they're going to literally start acquiring company just for their data sets. We've actually recently had an inbound where someone was more interested in our data than our revenue, and you're like, that's curious. So maybe people are going to come in and actually the one-time fee will be through acquisition. But I think the people who have really private, super contextual, super specific data sets are going to just build on top of a private model and have to do it through calls. And maybe I'm not seeing the big picture, but it does make me happier that you said Zuck said something similar, because I think like I said, the majors view at this is a much better view, because they're all competing to be the 1 to 5 LLMs that everyone builds off of.
What do you feel the future of work looks like in this new world where AI is emerging and becoming smarter, more powerful, cheaper? The models just keep getting cheaper and cheaper. ChatGPT, OpenAI just released 4.0 mini, 33x, reduced the cost by 33x, which was absolutely insane. And I think there's a big fear right now that AI is going to replace human work. Teams are going to be reduced. Teams are going to collapse. The size of teams are going to collapse. There's a thread with Sam Altman, and he has a bunch of his buddies, and they have been placing bets on when the first billion-dollar company, one-person billion-dollar company, is going to emerge, mainly powered by AI. So what's your thoughts on this idea that, teams may not need to be as big because we have AI and automation supporting it?
Actually, it's already happening. I mean, you see the way Scrum teams are built in technology. We're looking at most teams are 7 people or smaller in developing software. If you have a 15-person team, it seems huge. So I don't think that's going to be new. And I think just like Gen Z they were sort of mobile data technology native. We're going to have the Gen after Gen Z. Has it been named? They're going to be AI native.
Alpha. Gen Alpha.
Alpha. Alphas are going to be AI native, and they're going to be like, what? I just ask whatever it is I'm holding, and you might not even be holding it. It'll soon be embedded. Um, but I don't think it changes that much. So maybe teams get smaller. That's been happening for years. So I think that'll keep happening. Is the world going to crash and no one's going to work? I don't believe that to be true. There is some sort of, maybe it's utopian or maybe it's dystopian, but people said no one's going to need to work anymore. 20% of the people will make all the money, and 80% of the people, maybe we should pay them to do arts. That's not going to happen either, because history has shown that people with massive wealth don't just give it away as a charity to people. I mean, they occasionally say, "I'll pay for the ballet," but that's only because they were strong-armed into that. That's not typically what happens. I'm not thinking that's going to happen. We are in a period. I do believe that this is, the Carnegies and the Rockefellers happened again with the Musks and the Bezoses. There will be a reaction to that, and it could come in an economically scary way, like the 1930 recession. And I'm not saying I'm predicting that, but I don't think there's going to be some where 80% of people can't find work, and we have this existential threat of wealth imbalance. I think the system will tear itself apart before that happens.
What about the idea of accountability? So we have a workforce that you talked about, Gen Alpha, as an example, that is going to be natively growing up with AI. So one of the things that I notice about society in general is misery loves company, and people love to complain about not doing fulfilling work, responding to emails, redundant tasks, XYZ. Now that a technology has been thrust into our environment that can do that repetitive task and take away that mundane stuff, where's the sense of accountability for the modern day worker to really lean into things that they're passionate about so they don't have to get caught in that loop of doing the repetitive stuff? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I'm a believer. I listen to this guy Eric Coryell, and he says you can't hold people accountable. Period. Full stop. They have to hold themselves accountable. And his belief is the concept of holding people accountable is you just take the work away from them. If you don't do XYZ by Friday, and then what you end up doing is if you don't do a good job that I think is a good job, then I finish the work before it goes to wherever it needs to go as your, say, boss. But that's not holding accountable. If I keep doing that, you're going to be like, Mike always finishes my work for me and he never gets rid of me. So
yeah,
we'll see how long that lasts. I think there's this the self accountability. You're going to be interviewing people on these things. Like you go back to the head, heart, briefcase, the heart piece. What are they passionate about? And you're right. There are not as many people who are passionate about doing AR and AP and doing the same thing every day. Although there are a lot of people who are passionate about jobs that are steadier and repetitive. But I think those steadier and repetitive jobs become at risk because they're the easiest to automate. But I think people need to have some level of accountability to what it is they want to do. And sadly, over time, this has gotten worse in the United States. I mean, there are kids who are 30 years old. You ask them what they're going to want to do. I mean, we're calling them kids. They're 30. They're not kids. They're full-grown adults. And they don't know what they want to do. Now, I applaud them for being honest. But it is interesting. In Europe, you apply to colleges with a major predetermined. So they're pushing that question earlier and they're actually treating, I guess, teenagers. You're like, you have to ask this question because you can't go to certain colleges without this. And by the way, you don't really switch. If you go into a pre-law program, you're pre-law. If you go to pre-med, you're pre-med. Whereas we have this very loose thing. So we're pushing that accountability. When does the accountability cop come? And I think we would benefit by treating our younger people in a more mature way than we've treated them. And I don't see this happening. I see it just going out. Maybe there'll be a rebound, but I don't see that. So I do think we could be in trouble with our current models about letting our kids stay kids too long.
One of my favorite sayings is when someone graduates from high school, I say this all the time on the podcast, when someone graduates from high school, 17, 18 years old, we ask them to make the biggest decisions in their life. Pick a career, go down this path, take on debt that you can't truly understand. But yet 1 month ago, they were having to raise their hand to go to the bathroom. It seems like there's a little bit of a disconnect in the way in which we push people into those positions of accountability, if that makes sense.
That is a really great perspective. And I do think, I do applaud a lot of those kids who make the decision to go to the armed forces or other forms of sort of organized public service, that they're making this decision. They make the decision to make money instead of take on debt. They go to a place where they can mature, and it can be really healthy. And I think we need more places like that that don't necessarily mean you have to hold a gun, because I don't think that should be the only way to do that. But have places where young people can go to mature. And there's interesting places. Israel does it with required service. Everyone does it. And actually, the friendships that you make in your required service and military, turns out in Israel, turns out to be like, these are the connections. You do business with those people later. You get recruited to work in their organizations, and they have a very healthy scene that comes out of that, that required service. I'm not saying we're about to go there, but I do think we need to change how we're doing things. But I do think involved parents certainly can help that decision-making process early. They don't always do it. It's not just involved parents or non-involved parents. It has to be involved parents who also are pushing some of those tough questions sooner and not letting the BS answers fly.
I mean, I was having a conversation before we kind of land the plane here 2 days ago with the director of admissions from Ohio State University. And he was talking about, I have more parents coming into these consultations with their children because one of the things we've recognized is that more student debt, unfortunately, equates out to be more family debt. And so parents are being encouraged to be a part of this process so their kids are making good decisions. And I feel like it's sad to say that the financial aspect that drives a lot of the burden has created an opportunity for parents to be more involved in that education process like you were talking about. But we do need more involvement. I wish it just wasn't just because of a financial catalyst, if that makes sense.
You know, I think we've the cost of education has gone up well faster than inflation, and not for just a few years, for like 40 years, maybe longer. And we've also built these palaces for kids, you know, with the nicest gyms and cafeterias, and that's been a big part in driving this educational cost. And it seemed like that became the basis of competition. You go visit a college and you're like, oh my God, the facilities are fantastic. Yeah. And you're like, you know, you go to some of the best facilities in the UK, and the buildings are old, but you get inside them and they seem old too. And, you know, your dorm rooms seem old, and that's okay, because it's okay. When should you live in a crappy place? Probably when you're in college, you know, and that's okay. And I think we've over rotated to these palaces that we've built, and it's become unattainable because $300,000 to pay for a college education, which doesn't prepare you for work, is not the right recipe.
Dante, do you have any points before we kind of end our episode here today?
Yeah, my last question, Mike. As you were speaking, I was thinking of within Predictive Index, you've seen so many different archetypes and scores. What are some of your top archetypes for leadership roles, and why?
It's interesting. I think every pattern can be an incredible leader. They just lead in very different ways. And I'll use a couple of examples. I think you're both high dominance. That's one of the drives. And high dominance, they gravitate to a general Patton type leadership. This is, you know, confident, standing on the tank, you know, charge the hill. And as a matter of fact, they'll jump down from the tank and run up the hill with you, and here we go. And it's you know, we're heading that way. not everyone does that. There's high extroversion leadership, and I like to refer to this as the Martin Luther King "I have a dream," where you're either a great orator or you're a great writer, but you paint a picture with words and ideas, and people follow you because they're like, that's it, that's the dream, and you lead with this I'll call it picture painting, but it's more than that. Now there's this high patience leadership, and it's actually Steve Jobs was an individualist, which is high patience, and individualists have this their own North Star. So the when you have your own North Star and you're patient towards that idea, the idea that people can tell him he's crazy and it doesn't matter. I have an idea, and you're like, if I'm right, I'm right, and if I'm not, I'm not. I get it, but I'm doing this. And you come up with this thing that has no buttons, and when it first came out with no buttons, you're like, there's no buttons, it's not going to work. I remember I used to have one with a ton of buttons, and I stayed with it. And it's funny. You're like, totally right. That persistent. I'm following my own North Star, and the last sort of major bucket there is the data-driven perfection form of leadership, where they're leading with exceptional. Like, this is exceptional, and you see this a lot in the Six Sigma, manufacturing production, where they're letting data and analytics run the day. The Toyota production system is very much that way. I actually refer to it as the Alan Mulally. He ran Boeing and then ran Ford. I know Boeing is no longer it's like almost a bad word right now, but he ran Boeing a long time ago, and then had a very successful run at Ford. And he was very data driven in his approach to that. But I think it's not like one pattern exceeds others. You might say, hey, for a startup, you want mavericks and captains and venturers because they're very risk tolerant. And for a hospital, you would want something the opposite of that because it's first do no harm. So I really think the opportunity matches the leader.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly insightful to have a system like the Predictive Index that gives us that output. And to be honest with you, when me and Dante are running through the actual system in itself, we were so surprised at how accurate it could be with how little time it took for us to actually go through the process of getting that information out. And so I know that you guys have created an absolutely amazing product. And it's so nice to be able to understand how if we slow down a little bit and we lead with head, heart, and as you said, the modern day version of the briefcase would be knapsack, I think we can make a lot better decisions on how we build teams for the future, because understanding the motivations first and then training that individual, like Dante talked a little bit about, from a skill set perspective to be the best value asset to our organization, I feel like is a recipe for a home run. And so, Mike, we are so grateful for you being on the podcast. We want to use the last couple seconds here for you to pose a question for our next guest. So what do you got?
Well, before I do that, Keenan, Dante, I love your interplay. I love how you listen. I love how thoughtful you are about the questions and how genuinely curious you are. It's really refreshing. I'm glad you found what you're doing because you're really good at it. So thank you for that. Thank you for allowing me to become a guest. My question is, how do we combat negativity and sort of bombastic statements with the algorithms that are driving what we see every day? And I view people as inherently good, but I view the news that we consume unintentionally, or sometimes it's intentionally, but is driving people to lean more bad. So how do we combat this? I categorize it as negativity, and it's sort of the bombastic nature, because bombastic posts get way more traction, right? People hate them, love them. Boom. How do we do that?
Well, I love that. Well, once again, for everybody who tuned in to this amazing episode with Mike and all the amazing work that you're doing at the Predictive Index, my name is Keenan Hart, and my trusty co-host here, Dante McLean. Mike, once again, thank you so much for joining the show, man. We really appreciate it. That's right.
You have a fantastic day. Thank you.